Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the DME for Peace community, and welcome to this week's edition of the M&E Thursday Talks on DME for Peace. These Thursday Talk webinars are made possible by the Carnegie Corporation of New York through the Peacebuilding Evaluation Consortium. And just in case you have forgotten, my name is Jack Farrell. I'm the DME for Peace Project Manager based here in Washington, DC. Today, I am delighted to welcome Jessica Baumgardner-Zuzik of Alliance for Peacebuilding, who's going to lead a discussion on the 7 guiding steps to achieve better learning in peacebuilding evaluation. Once Jessica has finished her presentation, we'll jump right into a question and answer session. You can ask your questions in advance of the discussion by submitting them through the question function on GoToWebinar throughout Jessica's presentation. I'm now going to hand this over to Jessica to get us underway. Jessica, you are very welcome to the M&E Thursday Talks. The floor is all yours.
Hi, thank you so much, Jack. I appreciate it, and welcome to everyone joining us virtually. As Jack said, my name is Jessica, and I'm the Senior Manager for Learning and Evaluation with Alliance for Peacebuilding. And today I'm going to introduce you to a document that we're in the kind of initial testing phases called the Guiding Steps for Peacebuilding Design, Monitoring, and Evaluation as part of the Peacebuilding Evaluation Consortium. So to get us started, I'm going to just provide a brief overview of the Peacebuilding Evaluation Consortium, or the PEC. And this is a field-wide effort that began in 2011, mainly to address the challenges of measuring results and learning within peacebuilding programs. It's comprised of Alliance for Peacebuilding, CVA Collaborative Learning, Mercy Corps, and Search for Common Ground. And as Jack alluded to, it's provided support from the Carnegie Corporation of New York. The overall goal of the PEC is to strengthen monitoring, evaluation, and learning practices in order to make peacebuilding more effective and inevitably to build a strong policy arguments to make the case for peace. So how does PEC do this? Basically, the PEC fosters this field-wide change through 3 major strategic initiatives. The first initiative is focused on developing methodological rigor in peacebuilding evaluation and adaptive learning practices. The second is improving culture of evaluation and shared learning. And the third initiative is focused on promoting evidence-based policy and practice. In the current phase of the PEC, which we're in our 3rd phase, I'm going to give you a brief overview of a couple of the activities that are focused under each of these initiatives. Some of these activities have already started, some are in the works, and some we're going to be starting or rolling out later this year. So under our first initiative to develop methodological rigor, we have 3 major activities. One is the Peacebuilding Evaluation Online Field Guide, which you can find on the DME for Peace website, up and running, an amazing resource that's sorted by beginner, advanced, and intermediate audiences. We also are working on developing a pilot training course on the guiding steps for peacebuilding design, monitoring, evaluation. And later this year, we'll be working on developing an online wiki to support this document that I'm going to be presenting to you today. Under the second initiative on improving the culture of evaluation and shared learning, we have 4 major activities. The first one focused on gathering evidence from program evaluations that have utilized PEC tools to reinforce not only the evidence base, but also understand the key learnings and findings from utilizing different tools and methodologies. We'll also be undertaking a cross-learning opportunity between a minimum of 2, upwards 3 or 4 organizations surrounding monitoring and evaluation with these tools. If you haven't already heard of, I encourage you to go and check out the training and coaching of the Peace Project Mentorship Program, which is on the DME for Peace website. We just finished our first round and we'll be starting a second one soon. And then, as you all are aware, since you're joining today, the online exchange through the continuation of the M&E Thursday Talks. The third initiative is focused on promoting evidence-based policy and practice. And we do this through ongoing dialogue that includes policymakers, donors, practitioners, both within the United States and Europe, and trying to focus more on our key counterparts within the Global South as well. We also are commissioning 2 subsector reviews to assess the quality of evidence available within peacebuilding in its current state on reconciliation programming and violence reduction activities. And then finally, what we're here to talk about today, kind of this back to basics on this guiding steps for peacebuilding design, monitoring, and evaluation. So just to give you a little motivation behind this document, we recognize that many of us believe very deeply that peacebuilding work matters and it has positive impacts, but To date in this field, we still struggle to show evidence of where our interventions have led to clear reductions in violence, increases in cooperation, or other outcomes that we're aiming for. And the PEC believes that this lack of evidence is one of the greatest challenges we face as a field, and accounts in part for the limited funding that is available for peacebuilding projects. As I think all of us are aware, this is becoming especially true in our global political climate and our own national security strategy focused on preserving peace through strength, kind of a reminiscent fallback to the Latin adage of si vis pacem para bellum. So the PEC has decided to go back to basics to design this document to help us have greater consistency across the field. It's set up to be a minimum set of steps that every peacebuilding program needs to go through to contribute robust evidence and learning to the field as a whole. Right now, it's set up to be a what to do document. It's not a how to do it. And as a result, it's quite short and brief and simplistic almost in that sense to lead up to following phases. As a general outline of the document, it's set up to explain each of the steps, discuss a little about why this step is important, show some of the critical elements involved in each step, and provide key resources that we curated based on current availability of resources in the field, and we feel, utilizing our advisory board and our own experts, are probably the most successful at explaining some of these key steps. So what are the steps? The 7 guiding steps are set up to be conducting a conflict assessment, peacebuilding program design, develop a monitoring and evaluation plan, conduct a baseline study, conduct monitoring and adaptive management, conduct an end-line study / evaluation, we'll talk about that, and disseminate and share results and key learnings. We can see off to the side of these 7 steps is actually an overarching step in general on conflict sensitivity and do no harm. The reason why this isn't its own unique step is that it should be an approach that every peacebuilding organization is applying to each of these individual steps and has implications within all of them. So just to go through a brief run through of these steps with very minimal overview to give you an idea of what we're looking at. The first step on conducting a conflict assessment, I think most of us are familiar with conflict assessments within the field, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but one of the key recommendations here is obviously, well, what conflict assessment framework do you use? We recommend that you look towards newer framework tools since they'll incorporate modern advances in the field. And one of the more obvious aspects is that if your donor has their own conflict assessment tool, you should make sure to use the one they require. Within the field of program design for peacebuilding, and truthfully across any sphere of evaluation, good evaluation is only going to happen if we're thinking about the process, our learning, the evidence we want to gather, how we're going to use that at the very start of our program. So we really emphasize within the Peacebuilding Evaluation Consortium, DM&E, design, monitoring, evaluation. Good peacebuilding program design is very clearly linked to your conflict analysis, and we recommend 4 clear steps within peacebuilding design. And of course, these are somewhat simplified as I spoke about, so there's more information in the document and we'll continue to expand this when we look at the interactive wiki. But the 4 steps include articulating clear goals, objectives, and activities, developing plausible theories of change. That could be both at each level of change, short-term, long-term, even middle-term, piece writ small, piece writ large, identifying preliminary peacebuilding indicators, and then putting these together into a logical framework or a log frame. So part of this initiative that's kind of branched off into its own aspect is we're working on developing a database of peacebuilding outcome indicators. A large majority of programs are looking at indicators focused very much on output orientation, activities, number of beneficiaries, without trying to capture that more encompassing outcome or impact indicators that we're keen on trying to capture as a field. So we've recognized that in a lot of other spheres, they have key areas where you can search for different indicators based on the type of programming you're doing, where that's greatly lacking within the peacebuilding field. So we're working on developing a database that encompasses right now about 6 different overarching themes. Now this could grow, it could reduce if we decide that some of them are combined together, but we're working on making this to an interactive database that can be searched and utilized by any peacebuilding program or development program in general to start kind of understanding the indicators being used by peacebuilding programming surrounding outcomes, as well as the methodologies and the tools that they're using to get there. So currently right now, the outcome indicators we're focused on are on dispute resolution, violence reduction, perceptions of safety and security, trust, resiliency, and social cohesion. The next step is developing a monitoring evaluation plan. An M&E plan is basically just a work plan for your M&E activities. It could even be in the design of a Gantt chart that a lot of us are familiar with program management. But it mainly helps us keep track of what to monitor and evaluate and when, who's responsible for that monitoring evaluation, what targets do we have within each, and what tools are we expecting to use for each of these aspects. Most M&E plans tend to include a summary of your project goals, objectives, and activities, your finalized list of indicators, our preliminary list of the data collection tools we're going to be employing, some sort of timetable for all of these activities. That could be a baseline, it could be your monitoring, midline reviews, internal reviews, evaluations, etc. And then pulling them together into some sort of M&E matrix that has them in one place and is easily accessible for your M&E staff, as well as your program staff, as well as your management. So the next step is conducting a baseline. Our baseline gathers qualitative and quantitative data that has to happen before you begin an intervention. We're going to measure the change in our indicators from the starting point to assess progress on what we're hoping to achieve. And a baseline really should be the first activity you undertake before the intervention. That's not always feasible, and it's something we're very aware of, but it really should be what we're aiming to achieve here. The four major steps to design and implement a baseline are identifying the goals of your study, determining your sample, that could be target and comparison or maybe even control groups, drafting and piloting the survey questions or the tool or methodology you're going to utilize, and conducting data collection, entry, and analysis. The next phase is on monitoring and adaptive management. So unlike baseline or our evaluation or endline, monitoring is our process of regularly collecting the data that's going to help us inform our programmatic decisions and determine the course of our program. Normally, there are three types of monitoring that you should include in your plan, including conflict monitoring, which basically allows us to regularly update our conflict assessment and understand what's happening in the context in which we're working. That way, we're able to make course changes and address potentially new risks or even take advantage of new opportunities as they present. This is where we mainly see uses for adaptive management and being able to respond to what you're seeing in the field so you can make informed decisions and evidence-based decision making. We also want to conduct implementation monitoring, which allows us to track our activities and see, are we hitting certain goals on time? Are we on budget? Are we going in the right sequence of our activities? And what type of quality is our implementation going at right now? In the field, normally we tend to find implementation monitoring is our most common form of M&E being conducted. And we're trying to really enforce the idea of results monitoring as well, which allows you to understand if you're on the right track for meeting the intended outcomes that you've set in your initial design phases. The final monitoring evaluation step involves endline study and evaluation. So an endline study reruns your baseline study and compares what you found at your beginning point in the baseline to where you're at your end point. We recommend you need to be using your same data collection tool and the methods as you use for your baseline, and ideally using the same data collection and analysis team. That may be internal, and we highly encourage these things to be internal versus external, but it's not always possible. The difference between endline and an evaluation is that the final evaluation generally will focus on bigger picture questions that could be related to the overall success or value of the program you conducted, and really looking at those questions of meeting your intended outcomes. If not, why not, unintended consequences, etc. One thing to note is that final evaluations are not always possible or even necessary to conduct. And we have a great resource on the PEC on the evaluability of different programs and different options if a final evaluation is not the right choice. The final step of the process is on disseminating and sharing results and key learnings. We need to share the results and lessons that you learn, both the successes and failures, with the broader peacebuilding field. This is one of the reasons DM&E for Peace has been such a huge part of the PEC, is creating an area where people can go, they can freely disseminate, share results, talk about what they found and learned, so we can cross-learn from not only different programs, but different organizations. So now that we've created this document, kind of what's next for both the document, the PEC, and where we're going. We're going to continue workshopping the document with local implementers. We've already conducted a series of roundtables, as I said, and we're going to continue doing so. We're working on developing an interactive wiki that will help us start to link resources from this what to do into a how to do it. We're also working on developing the indicator database I spoke about on these key peace building indicators. The PEC will be developing a pilot training course. And we're also seeking learning engagements with organizations who are looking to design or even at a stage of refining their organizational MME plans, where we could work with them to apply the guiding steps as an initial application and testing period and see how do we tailor and refine this document to be or to meet the individual needs of different organizations. And then we're also going to continue our donor and policymaker meetings. We see this document as a key both for implementers to be able to better understand what they need to be doing and associate key resources with them. At the same time, we see this as a necessary document for donors and policymakers to understand what do they need to require in the RFP and RFAs and proposal processes to make sure that they're also encouraging the highest level of DM&E possible within the peace building field. So just to end my time, because I want to leave a lot of space for conversation and questions, just a few guiding questions here that we don't necessarily need to follow in any order, but I wanted to give some food for thought is, do you think that the guiding steps that I've presented, these 7 key steps, are they comprehensive? Do you think that we're missing a key step that potentially has been excluded? How do you think that you would like to use this document as implementers? I'm not entirely sure who's on the line, but a lot of practitioners, I imagine, or new M&E individuals, how could you envision using a document like this? How would you prefer it be presented in paper form, in the wiki, in a webinar? What's the best way to reach you for your needs? I also wanted to put out there about, we are searching for potential learning engagements. I've included my name and email on the bottom of the screen. Please feel free to reach out to me if you feel that this would be an opportunity your organization would be interested in, and we could chat a little bit more about what this could entail and what capacity we have. And then also just another leading question on how do you think is the best way to disseminate this document? How do we get it out there? Is it that we conduct roundtables? Is it that we continue to have opportunities like this? I'm not entirely sure. So those are just some key questions that I'm interested in, but please feel free to reach out and ask anything that you're interested in, and I'll do my best to answer. So thank you so much, Jack.
Great, thank you very much, Jessica. I'm looking forward to sort of hearing the thoughts of the wider community as we get the discussion underway. And before we do that, just a couple of notes about our format for those of you who are new to the Thursday Talks and those who are familiar, you know how this works. You can submit a question one of 2 ways. The first way you can submit a question is through the question function on GoToWebinar. The second is that you can click on the little hand icon to raise your hand, and that will allow us to unmute your microphone so you can ask your question live. When you do submit your question, we ask you to submit your name and affiliation so we know where the context of the question is coming from. And just a note, these talks are recorded and posted on DME for Peace, so those who are not able to join us at this time can go back and learn from our wider discussion and participation. I think I'm going to kickstart this process, Jessica, and ask, this is obviously a very comprehensive document, and what I was wondering is, do you have a sort of an audience in mind when targeting this document, or is it a catch-all? Like, are you trying to, and is the Peacebuilding Evaluation Consortium trying to speak to donors, or speak to implementers, or speak to program staff? Or are we trying to speak to a specific audience, or are we trying to speak to everybody?
Thank you so much, Jack. That's an excellent question and something I definitely glided over. Initially when we first put out this document and started our roundtable discussions, we kind of felt that this was more of a catch-all document that could be applicable both to practitioners and donors and implementers. But as we've gone through now 3 different roundtables in all 3 different geographical contexts, it's become pretty clear that I think we need to refine the document in following phases to have two different versions. One that makes it much more accessible and informative to implementers who need a lot more information potentially on different steps. Not everyone will be at the same level or need the same information for all 7 steps, but could be a resource kind of list that also then, as I said, the plan is to take it more to a wiki type format with more interactive information, and then kind of streamline this a bit more towards a donor audience by removing some of the extraneous information, some of the how-tos that may not be required for them, but they also may have more specialized needs because, I mean, truthfully, I think donors also need certain capacity building themselves and understanding when they make a requirement of an M&E, let's say log frame, what does that look like? What is its utility? And when they're receiving that with their proposals, to be able to better assess, are they on track? Are they not on track? So currently as I know that was somewhat of a long question, a response to your question, but currently as it stands, it's one document. But I think the ideal version as we're moving forward is to have 2 versions of it. One that would be more applicable to donors to help them better understand what DM&E should look like for their RFPs and RFAs, and one that's much more focused on implementers and helping them get the resources and tools they need to be able to follow through these steps in their own programming.
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, I think it's just really important that we've moved beyond this idea that donors are setting minimum standards for our field, and we should sort of, as a field, want to understand our own programs better without the need of a donor. So setting this idea forward is really important, and explaining that to donors is equally important. Our next question comes from Cara Klassen, and Cara has asked, ooh, the question just disappeared. Kara's asked, how do you recommend sort of going about doing a conflict analysis that is targeted towards the project's goals and outcomes, but also true to what a good conflict analysis should be?
Hi, Cara. Thank you so much. That's a wonderful question, and one of my short answer would be I'm probably not equipped to answer that for you entirely right now, but one of the major recommendations I would make in terms of how do we conduct a proper conflict analysis, as you said, as it should be. Are we looking at grievances? Are we looking at key actors in the traditional sense of what that should be? And then how do we tailor that towards outcomes and outputs and goals, etc.? And for me, I think part of the key lessons here that we're trying to really reinforce around conflict analyses is that it's not a one-time catch-all. You may do it initially as you're working on your proposal or right after receiving a grant in that more traditional framework. But as you move forward and start, developing your M&E plan before you get even to implementation, you should be reevaluating the conflict analysis. And I think those reevaluations can be much more targeted toward some of these key questions that you're asking, such as what is the goal of this organization? How does this relate to our theories of change? And additionally, during the monitoring, as I spoke about, being able to reevaluate the current context. And I think it's more during those opportunities that we have to change a little bit or, target our conflict analysis more towards our programmatic questions without losing those key aspects that are critical to not only the conflict analysis stage, but also our conflict sensitivity approaches. One of the key things I can recommend to follow up with you on this is that, as I said, we are working on this more how-to, and I would be happy to discuss that in more detail with you, especially sharing some key resources on, what we're looking to encourage within the conflict analysis and more of those outcomes and outputs.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Cara, for your question. Our next question comes from Laura Gagliardone, who said, thank you for the very clear and meaningful presentation. To disseminate the findings and evaluation, what are the roles and implications for social media? Are those defined in this document?
So if I'm understanding, you're asking the role of social media in disseminating the document or the role of social media in disseminating key findings and learnings or results from individual programs?
I'm taking it as key findings from individual programs. So essentially, what I'm interpreting this question as, and Laura, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, is in this document, when it talks about sharing evaluation findings and sharing research with a wider field, it detail suggested outputs. For example, posting on social media, hosting a webinar, sharing the resource on the wonderful DME for Peace website. That's what I think Laura's getting at.
Great. Yeah, no, I mean, one, I can tell you the final step, the dissemination and sharing of key resources, was actually not, surprise perhaps for all of you, but was not one of the initial key steps that we outlined. That actually came about as a result of more of our roundtabling opportunities. So I would say, as the document rests right now, this is a bit more of a briefer section, and it's definitely an interesting concept and something I'm very interested in perhaps exploring. What avenues do we recommend for disseminating your results? And I would even say something that strikes me that I think the document is missing and we need more attention to is ethical considerations when we are sharing results, particularly in conflict and fragile states. What information we're sharing, what personal identifying information should always be removed. And that's something I think that the dissemination and key learning and results sharing really needs to highlight as well, to make sure that we have certain, dare I say, standards for ethical considerations for sharing our results. But I do argue that that shouldn't limit how we disseminate this information, just perhaps in what ways we do so, because the field as a whole really suffers from a lack of transparency and also a focus on sharing of successes rather than failures, which inhibits anyone else from learning these key lessons that we're finding in the programs. But I've definitely taken a keynote, Laura, and I think that's a really interesting addition to make sure to include in the document.
Great, thank you, Jessica. And just as an FYI to all the audience today, their slides for today's presentation will be posted alongside the recording on the DME for Peace website. Our next question comes from Hilda Damon, who actually works with me at Search for Common Ground, but is based in Tunisia. And Hilda has asked, can you conduct a conflict assessment and baseline in an integrated manner? Can it be the same exercise, or does it have to be two distinct and different steps?
Thank you so much, Hilda. One of the things that I think are going to become clearer, and we're really focused on trying to elucidate more in the process of moving from a what to do to a how to do, is that each of these steps, in many ways, there's no one correct way to do them. A baseline does not necessarily mean going and conducting a survey or, following up on a just qualitative approach. I think your question is really interesting on it. Could we combine a conflict analysis process with our baseline? And arguably, I would say yes. The steps are not meant to be a chronological approach exclusively. Normally, a conflict analysis will be conducted prior to a baseline, but they definitely could be integrated if you've taken into account already what those key goals and outcomes that you're looking to achieve in the program are, and you incorporate those within your conflict analysis. If that information is lacking and you haven't provided key indicators or baseline measures that we can then compare with some sort of end line or the exact measures we're looking to focus on in the study, the baseline is still a critical aspect of the research. So it's very dependent upon the individual program, and I would even say the capacity of each organization carrying these out. Because I have seen conflict analyses that are very intensive and can actually include a lot of critical information that we would want in a baseline, maybe to the exclusion of conducting a separate baseline.
Great, thank you, Jessica. We're going to try a live question. So as a sort of heads up to all of the audience that have their hands up, and this live question comes from my intern, Daniela Dijigan. And Daniela, I'm going to unmute your microphone to ask your question live. You are now live.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question is, this is just out of shared curiosity. It is in the case that a baseline and an endline study is conducted by two different evaluator parties, and let's say during mid-project, a third-party evaluator is introduced. How can you avoid certain discrepancies which can potentially be problematic to the evaluation.
So I believe that question is making sure sort of that sort of the baseline and end line are the same as when you have sort of different evaluators carrying out both parts of the process.
Right. So one thing I would say is that even if you're going to be doing your internal end line or evaluation yourself and employing an external third-party evaluator, you always need to be doing certain steps to triangulate your data. One, to provide data validation, especially if you're collecting your information yourself. And I fully encourage, and the PEC is very focused on encouraging internal monitoring and evaluation practices, moving away from the pure external evaluation that has tended to be the norm within the field. So I think that you conducting your own baseline, collecting your own monitoring data, and even collecting your end line data is a very, very positive step for the field as a whole. But that doesn't mean we want to exclude professional evaluations, external evaluations, or even third-party neutrals. So that's a kind of larger response to your question, but I would say one is that if you have kept a well-documented process on your own internal evaluations, both baseline, monitoring, and end line, and then compare that with a third-party evaluator and attempt to compare that with a tertiary type of data triangulation, that should help remove a lot of these discrepancies potentially. I normally tend to believe in my own field as a professional evaluator that documentation and transparency is your best friend in the field, and being able to really clearly look back on your entire process a lot of times can address some of those key discrepancies. Also making sure that the third-party neutral or the external evaluators that you hire have a really clear understanding of what your goals for the evaluation are, that they align with the data you also have been collecting so that they can complement each other. And then being open and honest when there are major discrepancies that perhaps you can't answer, and learning from that to be able to apply that to your own internal processes.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Our next question comes from Jasmine Linneberry of the Purdue Peace Project. And Jasmine asks, how is internal learning represented or encouraged within the steps? I'm thinking about how at the end external dissemination is encouraged, but wondering how could or does the step encourage further reflection internally as well as promote organizational learning?
Hi, Jasmine. That's a wonderful question. I think that internal learning mainly is highlighted within our monitoring and adaptive management processes, and trying to set up reflection points within your own projects that are not only they shouldn't be add-ons to what you're doing, but should actually be integrated within your work. So not only taking the time for these reflections while your project is carrying out, having those preset perhaps within your M&E plan is ideal, because you already know key areas that you're going, or key timeframes in which you're going to meet or have these reflection opportunities, but also being very accountable to what comes out of those learnings. If we determine in the course of monitoring and then having a reflection period that part of our programming is not working or is not actually achieving the result we want with our beneficiaries, we need to be responsible to that data and have informed decision making for the course of our programming. So it is within the steps currently more within the adaptive management. And I definitely think your points on further reflection for how to involve that or integrate that more within our dissemination and key learning step is a really good point, and something we should focus on, because oftentimes, in my own experience working with organizations, programs may have all of this in a very informal setting. Even if they did a post-program, almost let's say an exit interview to understand what they took away, it's not normally formally documented. So again, going back to that really rigorous type of documentation and transparency so that that can be shared within your organization. I think organizations are probably, what they need is more of an internal shared learning process. Is it that we come up with a one-page key learnings after each program that then is shared with your whoever, if it's an organizational structure of having, let's say, an M&E manager or an institutional learning manager, that can then be distilled and shared across programs, as programs tend to be somewhat siloed, even geographically in a lot of contexts. So the plan, the guiding steps hint or allude to this information, But I definitely think within the dissemination and even within the monitoring, that needs to be a bit more reinforced.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Jasmine, for your question. One of the things that's popped up quite a lot, Jessica, in the questions is whether or not this document is going to include templates. So, for example, will this document have a set of attachments with sample questionnaires, sample sort of evaluation guidelines, sample processes? And I was wondering if you could just elaborate on sort of the style of the document, style of the wiki, and what it will actually entail.
Absolutely. So the document in and of itself, as it lives at this moment from the various roundtables that it'll continue, is designed more as a static document. When it comes to particularly the conflict analysis, we do link to some key different frameworks for some of the large organizations like USAID, DFID, the same with the log frame requirements, but it doesn't currently provide examples or necessarily document templates. The idea behind the wiki, and that's why I'm really excited to hear some of this feedback from all of you to see what it is you need or want, is definitely to branch that out more and be able to provide some really key documents, either of organizations who have their own internal processes surrounding some of these, some better guidance on surveying questions or survey development, as you said, some of the evaluation guidelines, things like that. And being able to have them in a very similar format to like Wikipedia, that you can click on them if you're looking to explore more on a very specific template, or even if you don't need that going forward. Additionally, to accompany that, like I said, is the indicator database that my hope, as that is also being developed, is that we'll be able to include the methodology and the tool applied to collect each of the various ways that people are trying to get at these different indicators. One of the greatest pleas I can put to everyone out here is that we're looking to you as well to share this information with us as the PEC and Alliance for Peacebuilding, as all of our individual members, so that we can then compile this and make it more accessible to you. And unfortunately, there is quite a lack of formal evaluations or even case studies or write-ups that include a lot of times the exact tools and methodologies or document examples that we're as a field are wrestling with finding. But yes, while the document currently does not share that, the next step in the wiki is to make it as comprehensive as possible without necessarily enforcing one specific model, framework, or survey design, but to leave it open to the individuals to use it more as a resource and develop their own based on what potentially would fit best within their own programming and needs.
Thank you, Jessica. And you touched on this in your last question. And I just wanted to sort of elaborate a bit more so that people have a bit of context and for follow-up and continued discussion online is what prompted the Peacebuilding Evaluation Consortium to develop a set of guiding steps for peacebuilding evaluation. We have tons of resources in peacebuilding evaluation, but what was the sort of driving factor behind sort of developing a set of guiding steps?
Sure. I mean, part of the idea is that, peacebuilding programs, just like honestly any organizations across humanitarian development, economic development, all of these different spheres, they're at different levels of needs and capacity. That's certainly true. We have some organizations in peacebuilding who are conducting amazing RCTs, looking at violence reduction and a whole slew of organizations. But then we also meet with organizations, large organizations sometimes too. This is not a question of breadth of programming or size of organization or even your funding streams, who may only be counting the activities that they're doing without really trying to understand peace writ small and our greater contribution to peace writ large. And the field has really lagged behind a lot of our other spheres like health and education on trying to evaluate and get to what is our impact. We're doing all of this sometimes disparate programming, but we don't actually know what our collective impact is toward bringing a more just and peaceful world. So upon a large amount of research and a lot of kind of key informant interviews, we've really come to the understanding that we kind of need to go back to basics to create greater consistency across all of these programs so that we are making sure that we're adhering to some really key minimal steps to be achieving high quality data, or even just data in general, hopefully leading to high quality data, that we can start to look more at our collective impact. Unfortunately, everyone is at all these different levels right now, but it can be really difficult to, as a field, and when we start to look at the field as a whole, understand our impact. And unfortunately, we really need to get there. I say this often, and it's just the truth. We can't keep failing well as a field to produce and understand the impact of our programming. And it's something that, especially in policy and advocacy and in the world of kind of shrinking resources for any type of development work, we are constantly asked at Alliance for Peacebuilding in particular in our policy work, well, show me why this works or prove it to me. And unfortunately, we can't. So the guiding steps was a way to take all of those needs and try and build some consistency, and then provide a way to not just remake the wheel and provide more and more resources, but to distill that into some really simplistic 7 steps that can help programs get to that point where then they are being more creative, they are using more robust tools, new technologies, being innovative, and being able to provide much greater data to have not only support our policy arguments for making the case for peace, but also to inform their programmatic decisions.
Thank you, Jessica. I think everybody online and the field at whole appreciate a document which is practically oriented. Having 7 steps as opposed to a 70-page guide on sort of peace building evaluation is definitely more practical and easier to implement for those of us who are not evaluators, and for those of us who are put off by the jargon that we often see in our work. I'm also going to use this opportunity to make a pitch to our DME for Peace community about sharing resources. DME for Peace is a global community platform. We have 5,500 members from across the world, from 191 countries, actually, with over 1,200 community resources coming from organizations big and small. We want you to upload your resources and ones that you think that the whole field can benefit from. If you have any issues uploading your resources to the site, please feel free to email me or email the DME for Peace website. But you should be able to go ahead and directly upload those resources to DME for Peace, so the whole field can actually learn from what your organization is doing and from what sort of tools you're using to develop more effective programming and more effective learning. I think we're just about out of time today. I know a lot of people have asked about sort of can they access a draft of the document. Jessica, when can we expect a draft of this document?
So I have a draft available, and I would honestly encourage you to reach out to me individually if you're interested. We are trying to update it still. It's a living document, so keeping that in mind that I'm going to continue roundtabling this and working on changing it or updating it and taking it from the static form into the online wiki that I'm hopeful, at least in a very plain text form online, will be available by end of March. But if you're interested in receiving the document as it is right now, please feel free to reach out to me, and we'll be posting at least a draft version on DME for Peace as well. And then I do encourage you, I'm just gonna take a real quick plug here, Jack, as well, to, if you're interested in potentially participating in a learning engagement with your organization and us concerning these steps and designing your own internal M&E plan or refining that, please also reach out to me to discuss.
Great. Thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you to the entire DME for Peace for joining another edition of the M&E Thursday Talks. As a reminder, the recording will be posted online on our media gallery later today. Please feel free to return to it and share it with your colleagues. We'll add the draft of the 7 guiding steps as well as today's slides to that page whenever they're ready. Just a reminder, we're going to be back on March 8th when we host Alicia Clifton and Jessica Murray of Search for Common Ground, who will be discussing the launch of Battle for Humanity, which is Search for Common Ground's latest innovation, a social movement and mobile game that forges real-world heroes, where people can sort of gain points by completing missions that transform your community. This is a really exciting step for our field in sort of engaging people in the real world on your doorstep. We hope you're able to join the discussion, and you'll have more information about that in the coming week. Thank you again to Jessica. Thank you again to the wider community. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and see you online in the near future.
Thank you so much.